Well, welcome everybody. You're going to hear me talk a little bit about being customer-centric, so you're my customers for the next 50 minutes or so. Who had heard of Avery before this event? Just put your hand up if you've heard of Avery before this event. We're talking 82.75%. Must try harder. Actually, being slightly famous is actually terribly complicated because you're not sure if people know you when you meet them or they say hello to you. And I remember the day that I was knighted, it was announced in the New Zealand Honours list, and I was coming out of Bunnings Warehouse with my father-in-law. That's a problem in itself because he's only 7 years older than me, and I have to keep up with him because he thinks he wants to do all this testosterone stuff. So he's got concrete under one arm and I've got concrete under the other. And we're walking out to the checkout counter, and a builder walks past, and he obviously read the Herald that morning and saw the photograph, and he goes, "Good on you, Xray." And this only happens in New Zealand, we just communicate with each other, no class structure. And so I got to the checkout counter, and I thought that was nice, just to be recognised. My first recognition as a knight, And we get to the checkout counter, and the checkout chick, she tots up all the things, and she said, "That'll be $109.27, sir." I thought, does she know, But it's quite complicated. I'm going to talk to you about how innovation occurs and why we're very much at the leading edge of technology in the world. But we don't know, most people don't know that. And we're very bad at telling people how good we are at stuff. And in this room is probably a huge intelligentsia which can actually really change the whole future of emergency care, because we've got all of the elements that you actually need to do that in this country. We'll go into that in a bit more detail. But we have to understand who we are as a country. And they say that you should never write about a country after a week of arrival because you stop seeing it. Once you know where the dairy is, you stop looking. And that's what our failing is as a human species. Pretty much every invention in the whole world comes from one single person seeing something that's there for everybody to see, but actually sees it and acts on it. Every invention that you can possibly think of comes from the power of observation. And you've all got that, but unfortunately, our society doesn't allow us to sort of think that way. I was blessed because at school, I was brought up in orphanages in the UK, and nobody gave me glasses. I needed glasses because I was short-sighted. Nobody gave me glasses or checked my eyes, so I couldn't see the board at school. And also I had acute glue ear because of the poor living conditions, and I couldn't hear what the lecturers were saying. And that was the best thing that ever happened to me in my whole life, because it gave me the one thing that I use every day that makes me slightly clever in terms of being an inventor, and that's the power of observation, because that's all I was left with, just being able to see what happens. And sometimes in a disaster situation or riots in developing countries, I've been the first one to understand what's going on because I can see things, I can see people's body language, I can see the way that things are changing. And everything's there for all you to see all of the time, but you generally don't see it. You think about how elegant invention can be. Most people that invent stuff that's really serious stuff are usually not practiced in the art. They're ordinary people like you. And so a good example would be the guy that was hunting in the Swiss Alps. His dog came back to him, was covered in all these little cockleburs, these little tiny seeds, and they were all over his trousers as well. He got home and ripped them off and looked at them under his kid's microscope and saw they had all these hooks on them. And he was the guy that invented Velcro. It's as simple as that one moment of observation. There's another guy who was fishing with the Indians. He was an engineer and he was fishing, and they were showing him how to do ice fishing. They cut a hole in the ice and he whipped out this fish. And as soon as it came out into the minus 40 degrees temperature, it froze, solid as a rock. So it was useless. So he threw it on the back of the ute and forgot about it for a couple of months. When the fall came, it started to melt. So he cooked it and he thought, I wonder if it's any good. And it was beautiful. And his name was Mr. Birdseye. And he invented Birdseye frozen foods, which was, flash freezing. It's about that, looking down a microscope and seeing that these bugs don't grow up against this mold, and you invent penicillin. All of you are capable of doing that. And the future of emergency care is in your hands in terms of you thinking about those things. Also understanding who we are as a species. Whatever we do, if you're customer-centric, you make products for your customer. Don't make products and try and sell them and find customers, because you'll fail. And you've also got to keep thinking about the future, because what your customers today will be different customers tomorrow. So you want to try and future-proof whatever you're going to do, because we're really in the most disruptive period in the whole history of mankind. If you think about how inventions are changing very quickly, we're in this logarithmic stage. Because if you think about industries, for instance, that change and get overwhelmed, think about something as simple as the lighting industry. For millions of years, the only lighting that was available was getting fat from animals and putting it into a small bowl and making a wick. So for millions of years, people were in caves with light generated by fossil fuels, right? That took up a few million years for that to be usurped by somebody refining those oils and putting it into a kerosene lamp. And that lasted for probably about 100 years, kerosene lighting in houses. And then in London, somebody came up with the smart idea of piping gas into people's houses. And they invented gas lamps, and that lasted for about 40 to 50 years. And then somebody came up with the idea of putting electricity into those houses, and they then could have incandescent lights. And that lasted for about 50 years. And then somebody came up with the idea of halogen lights, and that only lasted about 15 years before LED lights usurped that. So you can see what's happening. You've got this increase in the rate of change. And whilst you might think, because of you need more knowledge to actually invent something, it's going to be more complicated to invent something now. It's actually much easier because you can actually go online. I mean, I educated myself not at school because I read nothing at school because I couldn't see the board, didn't know what they were doing. So I'd go to the library and every day I'd read the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is like Google of today. So I can do a whole lot of things, and a whole lot of little bites of information. I never learnt French or algebra, and I have no idea what they're for. But what I did was got knowledge, that I could shuffle knowledge and actually invent stuff that's worth something. And so what I can tell you is the more disparate your knowledge is, the more likely you are to invent something. The next best thing to that is us, just the power of us. There's not one person in this room who's as clever as all of us. So talk to each other at these conferences and exchange ideas, because you may just come up with something that's absolutely game-changing. And why it's easier to do so is because you can go online to Google and be an expert overnight on whatever you want to find out about. So you can connect the dots. So the thing is, though, to understand us as a species, because we're pre-programmed to do everything pretty much, whether it's flight reflexes or if I want to do an ad. This is an important thing because I think that one of the things that's important about where we're going with the emergency response is to get everybody involved, everybody in New Zealand involved. And that really needs to have some sort of advertising and marketing strategy that makes it a community spirit that we're all involved in this together. And that happened in the Second World War. You know, everybody got involved in the war effort, and it brought a whole spirit of community. There's one picture that summarises that for me at the end of the bombing in London. There was a butcher's shop, and there was this wonderful photograph taken of this butcher's shop, and it was completely trashed. The front was blown out, and he got two 44-gallon drums and put a door on top of them, and then he had all the meat from the shop on top, and he had a handwritten sign, and it said, "More open than usual." But if you get the right ad for your business, you'll release oxytocin. People actually like it. It's the hug hormone. And so they remember it. If you try and do a drama thing, which most people try to do around disasters, it invokes a flight reflex and they shut off. So you've got to be careful about understanding what you're trying to do with your customers. Understand your customers. The reason a piece of jibboard is 1,200 millimetres wide is because that's what a man can carry. That seat that you're sitting on is about 16 inches from the ground. Your tabletop is 900 because that's the right height for us as a species. So understanding everything about your customer and what they want and what they're likely to do in a disaster is important. So think about customers, not come up with an app or something. Think about how that app is going to help that customer. And we're in this disruptive period where you could do an app that communicates with people and they get a better understanding of what you're trying to achieve. But I also want to talk about New Zealand and what makes us different. I lived in the UK and had a reasonably successful business career. And eventually, well, what happened was the other thing about life is that we're a funny species. We're the only species on the planet that know we're going to die, but does nothing about it. I know I've got about 4,795 days left to live. And so I do something about that. I've always had a plan in my life. You were all born with only about 30,000 days. You do nothing about it. You live like there's no tomorrow. If you were starting a business, what you'd do is you'd plan how you're going to build up that business, and you'd know what your exit strategy is, whether you're going to do an IPO, whether you're going to sell the business, license the technology, and you know what your exit strategy is. Your exit strategy is the same as mine. You're going to bloody die. And for most of you, it'll be a big bloody surprise. If you want to be successful at anything, you need to have a plan. I've always had a 10-year plan. Sometimes what I do is after 3 years, I mitigate that plan because things are changing and I know a lot more about what that strategy is like. My first 10-year plan was at the age of 14, which was firstly to get out of the orphanages. So I ran away and lived under a railway bridge for a year and started to educate myself, going to art galleries, libraries, and to the library every day to study Encyclopedia Britannica and other things. But my two goals at the age of 14 were, one was to be a millionaire by the time I was 26, and the other one was to be loved, preferably by as many women as possible. Because I hadn't been loved, I didn't have a mum and a dad, and I didn't know anything much about relationships, but I thought if people loved me, I'd be happy. And so I gave it a good crack for about a decade. My wife, rather unfortunately, refers to these years as my Tiger Woods years. I like to refer to them as my years of due diligence. And there was a lot of due diligence going on. Well, it wasn't entirely my fault because I didn't have any sort of grooming from mum and dad or whatever. My only two touchstones, for instance, when I was under the bridge and I wanted to learn about male-female relationships, my only two touchstones were the magazines that I was delivering on a Monday and a Thursday for the council house estates. I had 3 paper rounds, and they had these magazines. And the first one was Woman's Own, 1953. Brilliant. Because if you knew about love in Women's Own, you knew that your heart was going to be pounding and you could hear the heart in your ears. Music would be playing, bambas would be jumping. You couldn't speak when that woman came into the room. Another touchstone was Playboy magazine. And that didn't play out well at all, really. But the other problem I had, and I was very good at seducing young women because I was customer-centric. If I was taking out a flower-powered child from the 60s, I'd pick her up in my antique MGA because you'd think a bigger car would be too crass. And if it was a girl from Knightsbridge, I'd take her out on my E-Type Jag. And they'd all end up at the same Italian restaurant at some point in the evening. And the maitre d' would open the door and say, "Sir, this is the most beautiful woman you've ever bought here," because they were on the payroll. So that's post-marketing surveillance. But I was very good at it. But the big problem I had was that I didn't like acrimony, I didn't like tears, and I didn't like anybody getting upset. So I never broke up with any of them. You do that for a decade. It's just bloody tiring. The travel. And so I didn't know what to do. And thankfully, God or somebody intervened, and I did become a millionaire by the time I was 25, and I had 3 businesses. One was in London, one was in Canterbury, halfway between London and Dover, and one was in Dover. And I had these little satellites of female relationships in these areas, and they couldn't talk to each other because no mobile phones. They had to go to a telephone box in the road. They had to get on a bus to go somewhere. You could keep them all totally separate. And that went on for a decade. But finally, God intervened, or somebody intervened. I came round this corner late one night on my motorbike. I'd taken to getting around London on a motorbike, and some idiot had put a roundabout there where there wasn't one when I went to work in the morning. And I smashed into it and broke every bone in the left-hand side of my body. I was in hospital for 6 weeks. That was enough time for all those women to find me. At the same time, they weren't happy. I left for New Zealand. No, I didn't leave for New Zealand. I was running away from myself. The 10-year plan had only kind of half worked. I'd made some money, but the women thing hadn't made me happy. And I didn't know what to do about that. So I went on an adventure to find myself. I sold everything that I had in the UK. And I ran away to find myself. I went to all the good countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and eventually came to New Zealand in 1973. and I found home. And as I said before, you don't really know what country you live in when you are born in that country. It takes sometimes somebody from outside to look at that country with a new lens and understand what that country is. And I'm just going to show you, through my power observation, what I found when I arrived in New Zealand. For the moment I arrived, I knew that I'd found home and somewhere I could live. And I arrived at an unscheduled flight at 4 a.m. in the morning because your air traffic controllers were on strike again. And I arrived at the International Arrivals Terminal, which is the actual domestic terminal now. And it was a big red painted galvanised tin shed with open rafters. And there were these birds flying around, popping on the tables below. And it still happens today, except it was much worse then. And there were these girls in their little uniforms trying to mitigate the problem with the bird poo by cleaning it up. But also to mitigate it, there were 5 guys with swan dries on and air rifles shooting the birds. I thought, brilliant. You know, I've been to Beirut, but I've never seen anything like this. Don't tell Gareth Morgan. No, but I thought, this is amazing. You know, they just shoot the birds. No fun. Anyway, it got better because this guy that I met on the plane, and just like every Kiwi today and myself, we wait until somebody gets to the bottom of the steps of the plane and then we say, what do you think of New Zealand? So he said, look, Mum's meeting us at the airport and we'll give you a spin around town and take you home. And that was my first real nomenclature problem because in England, your mum is your mother, end of story. But of course, in New Zealand, mum can be your wife. So when he got to the curb and started pashing this woman who looked old enough to be a sister, I thought, hello, there's a bit of Julian banjos going New Zealand land here. They're not right. But it got better because in the back of this little Mini, and it was a Mini with no roof rack, just a Mini, little 850cc Mini, in the back was his mother and father-in-law. They'd come up from Christchurch. And he didn't know that, and he'd offered this lift, so he felt obliged. He said, don't worry, be all right, mate, we'll get in, don't worry. And I'd been educated at some of the best colleges in London at that stage. I knew about volume, physics, maths. I knew he had 2 large suitcases. There was him and his wife, or his sister, whoever she was. There was the old people. Then there was all the stuff I had, the camping paraphernalia. It's just technically not doable. Anyway, we're driving along the southern motorway. And the old boy's got one suitcase out like that, another one on the roof. And the young guy's got all of my rucksacks strapped around his arm, and I'm in the back like a Malteser with the girls barreling along the motorway. And that's when I knew within an hour of arrival in New Zealand, impossible is just a starting point for Kiwis. They've got no respect for the status quo, they just do stuff. And so that was the first clue that this country wasn't normal. But what happens when you stay here long enough, you get this osmosis into turning into be a Kiwi. And it's a state of mind. And you've all got it. You don't know you've got it, but it's an absolutely state of mind. So my catharsis was, house prices were doubling overnight in Auckland, nothing new. And so I bought a few houses, and I just went around, bought these houses. One of them was a lovely villa, which had a lava flow going halfway through the basement. And I thought, if I could dig that out, I could make a 4-car garage and increase the value of the property. I was bored, didn't have anything better to do. So I got a Kango hammer from the Hypodermic place, a little 850-watt job, and I drilled it into the mountain to get rid of the mountain. And if you've ever done that, you'll know that it goes in quite quickly past the hasp that separates the tool from the machine, and you can't get it out. So now you're paying about $7.50 a day for a sculpture. So if you're a scientist, what you do is you go and get the bigger version to dig that one out. So you get the 3-kilowatt one, and you drill that in past the tool that separates the bit from the machine, and it embeds itself in the mounting next to that one. And now you've got 2 sculptures that you're paying $39.50 a day for. So thankfully, what solved the problem was I got one of those big green pneumatic things, and that saved the day. Not that I ever used it, because what happened was the noise from that caused Jack from across the road to come over. Now, Jack was 78 years old, and I never saw him in the decade I knew him before he died take a cigarette out of the corner of his mouth. And he came over and went, heard the noise, what you trying to do? So I'm trying to dig out the basement, put in a 4-car garage. You won't do it like that, boy. So I know now. He said, come and look at my place. And I went over to his place, and it was like a whole square of the mountain was gone, just a square of butter, 4-car garage, no striations of any drill marks, just the mountain gone. I said, that's brilliant. That's exactly what I want to do. How do you do that? Dynamite. What? I said, isn't it dangerous? He said, no, no, soft charge, few tyres, bit of steel. Mum was upstairs, that's his wife doing the washing up. Doof, few floorboards popped up. She complained about nails scuffing her slippers, banged them down, all sweet, I'll do your place. And he did. They're mad, you know, completely mad. And then he would come across my place every weekend because I don't think he liked his wife much, and he'd come across and he'd say, you've got a great view of Mount Eden, Ray, if you could get rid of that macrocarpa. I said, I haven't got a chainsaw. He said, I have. Because before he worked, he used to be the chief dynamiter at the Thames gold mine. And before that, of course, he worked in the forestry. Of course he did. And he produced this chainsaw that hadn't been started since the Boer War. I'm not even sure that it had a blade on it, because when he started to cut the tree, steam was coming out of the tree. It wasn't even, you know, chips or anything. It wasn't smoke, it was just steam. And he had me hold the top of the tree with a rope, and he said, when I say pull, boy, you pull. And then there was this twisting, cracking sound. He goes, run! And when I came to, all I could see was a bloom of blue smoke and this cigarette pulsing in time to his heart, because I think he thought he'd kill me. And then those immortal Kiwi words as he said, don't worry, mate, I'll cut you out. So you guys are completely mad. Now, if you stay enough time around people who think like that, you become like them. So about a year later, somebody came to me and said, Ray, you're a bit of a pharmaceutical scientist. We're setting up the Department of Clinical Pharmacology at the Auckland Medical School. Would you like to set it up? And if I was in the UK, I would have said, I can't possibly do that. I know nothing about pharmacology, know nothing much about gross anatomy. I couldn't possibly do that. But I've been in New Zealand for about 18 months, so of course I said, OK. Because I was a Kiwi. And that's what happens. That's the way that Kiwis are. We don't know that we're that way. And what's bad about us as a society is that we don't celebrate who we are as a country, I don't think, at large, and we don't really understand how clever we are on the world stage. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But what I want to do also is give you some tools, hopefully, the lessons learned that I learned when I was going through setting up various businesses to make teams that really, really work and change things. Because what I realised when I first came to New Zealand was, well, I should just do one more click further on. It was true when I was setting up the Department of Clinical Pharmacology that I didn't know anything about pharmacology. In fact, they made me do a medical just before I joined to make sure I wasn't going to die. And they took me down to this very super Xray machine that they had at the university. And I was having checkups every 6 months anyway, so I didn't expect to see any problems. But with their super Xray machine, I could see when I got the results back, they gave them to me sitting outside the waiting room for the doctor to see me. And I had a look at them and I could see this huge cancerous growth in my left lung. And I was terrified. I thought, shit, this is not good. And I went into the doctor, slammed her down. And I said, Doc, this isn't good, is it? And she said, that's your heart. You'll need one of those. So that's really how unprepared I was for setting up the Department of Clinical Pharmacology. But we did, and we set up one of the best teaching classes in the whole world. And one of the things we did that I set up was a little business to the side which did bioequivalence testing, which was drug testing for drug companies. And we did that and made a few $1 million a year so that the lecturers could go on sabbatical and do things. But we were doing a lot of work for a guy called Graham Douglas, who wanted to set up Douglas Pharmaceuticals Manufacturing. And he came to me one day and said, Ray, can you come and work for me as my technical director and build these factories to make drugs and pharmaceuticals much cheaper and better and faster than any other company's done to date? And if I was in the UK, I would have said, I can't possibly do that. I know nothing about tablet machines, never made a capsule in my life. But I've been in New Zealand for 7 years, so I said, OK, because I was a Kiwi. And we did. Douglas, when we started Douglas Pharmaceuticals, and this is a very important story in terms of being customer-centric, understanding everything about your customers. At the time that we set up Douglas Pharmaceuticals, there would have been 5 multinational drug companies making drugs in New Zealand: Glaxo, SmithKline, Beecham. Today there are none, and those that do manufacture in New Zealand use Douglas as their contract manufacturer. So how did the small generic startup company beat a multinational company at its own game? And the reality was they were trying to sell products. And the products were identical, actually, because generic drugs have to be clinically proven to be the same as the other multinational drugs. And they were trying to sell products, and they would sell a very big, glossy brochure, and they'd go around to the pharmacists saying, look, we've been in business for 50 years. Here's a nice glossy brochure. That Douglas stuff's got an A4 price list. It doesn't even have a brochure. So you've got to trust this stuff. So we didn't try and compete and sell products. What we did, we went to the pharmacists and said, what do you want? And they said, well, we would like 1 month's interest-free credit, which enables us to grow our business. We'd like bonus stock. So if we gave them 10, we sold them 10, give them 2 for free. And we liked that because that put more of our product on their shelves. So listen to your customers and find out who your customers are. The important thing about your customers is to understand every customer in your business, okay? And what happens is people tend to look externally rather than internally. Because the most important customers work like this. The most important customer in your whole life is the person you go home to at night. Because if that's not right, you can't function to do the next part of it. I was at a share marketing conference talk many years ago, and there were share milkers there, and their wives would get up every morning and make sandwiches for them and send them off to work. But they didn't really appreciate each other as customers. And what we do in our firm, and I do this with my wife every night before we go to sleep, not what you think. What you do is you turn to that person at the end of the day and give them 3 adjectives to describe their performance as a human being during that day. And it's very powerful. You don't have to talk about it, you don't have to explain it, but just 3 adjectives. And when I did this at this share milking conference, there were these wives with the share milkers, and they never talked to each other about how they felt. And there was paroxysms of tears going through the whole conference. In fact, the conference convener, he was crying when he came up and gave me a hug, because they actually hadn't communicated with each other. And it's very powerful. At Douglas, when I set up Douglas Pharmaceuticals, I realised for the first time that all those years in the UK when I was going out with those ladies, I wasn't actually looking for a partner, I was looking for a family. And so having given up looking for a partner, I made the people that I worked with my family, and I treated them like family. So if you joined Douglas Pharmaceuticals, what would happen is you'd join and I'd say, welcome to the board, I'm the CEO and I'm Dad. My job is to look after all of you. Your job is to look after me. And if you 2 guys, as siblings, think that you're going to show off and show how clever you are as individuals, you'll find the other members of the team will put their hand in the air and start whistling like Superman, because clearly you think you're Superman. You're not, but we are. There's nobody who can take us on, because we actually believe in each other and we're unassailable. And that's how you can build teams. You spend more working time, waking hours with the people you work with. But what happens in large organisations is they get segregated into disciplines, into accounts, marketing, quality assurance, and everybody hates accounts. So you get these fractionations. But if you can make them work together and everybody understands their place and their role, you can build these unassailable teams. There's not one person in this room who's as clever as all of us. And if you work together and talk to each other, you can become the most powerful preventative agency in the world. Half of my life is spent making medical devices, which in a way have parallels to what you're trying to do. Because what you do is, my whole life has been about failure mode, what we call failure mode cause risk analysis. What can go wrong with something when you make it? And that's why I didn't get married till I was 60. A lot of due diligence. But it's the same thing as what you're trying to do, trying to understand what can go wrong and put in those preventative measures. I was actually in Christchurch when the earthquake occurred. I just finished talking to 600 urologists. They were the guys that went off to do the amputations and get people out. And I saw firsthand what can happen in those environments. And so that's one of the tools that we have against other countries that haven't had those kind of events, because you actually see firsthand what can go on. I mean, I was lucky because I've been in Nepal and I've been in Eritrea, where civil unrest and war's gone on. Just a little story about Eritrea and Kiwis. We were in Eritrea at the end of a 30-year war of independence, and it was completely munted, and we were there to build a factory for the Fred Hollows Foundation. And the war, rather inconveniently, started up again, and the MiGs came over and bombed one of our warehouses, which contained all of this high-tech stainless steel ducting to make this plant work. And I was upstairs watching my boys downstairs, my band of brothers, which I treat like sons, and they were all downstairs looking up at Dad, and they knew that Dad was upset because I was going to have to send them all home over the Sudan, probably for about 6 months, because there was nowhere in the country where we could make ducting because there was no aluminium sheeting that we could use as an interim product, and I was working out what to do. And I heard them take off in the middle of the night in their utes with their pop rivet guns. And I did what I normally do in those situations, is drink half a bottle of whiskey. I find it takes the edge off, you've got a problem. Just half a bottle of whiskey. Always carry one with you, Emergency, as I did in Christchurch. Anyway, so, and when I got up in the morning, I could hear them all in the yard downstairs, and they had these huge, big sheets of aluminium, and they were pop riveting them together and forming them with their own formers into ductwork. And I knew there was no aluminium in the whole country, so as I was walking down, I was going to say, where did you get these sheets of aluminium? And then I could see that they were grinding off the motorway sign to Karen. They'd been out all night knocking off all the motorway signs for the whole country. Because they're Kiwis, they don't give a shit, Got a problem. If you go into that factory now, it's got beautiful stainless steel ducting, but in the roof space, rather like, Scott's hut, there's a little bit of aluminium ducting pop riveted on with just all the signatures of all of these guys. And that's what we're like in New Zealand. We're different than the rest of the world. In fact, I published a book about 2 or 3 years ago called The Power of Us. What I was trying to understand was, what makes us different as a country? Is it that we have this number 8 fencing wire mentality and are just innovative because of distance? Is it that we innately have this disrespect for the status quo? And it turned out to be something really, really quite eloquent. And that is in the tagline to the book, New Zealanders Who Dare to Dream. This is one of the few countries in the world you can dream to be anything that you want to be. If you wanted to be Prime Minister and you're under the age of probably 40, reasonably easy on the eye, don't go around pulling people's hair, you can be Prime Minister. And it's true. This is a country which will allow you to become the person you want to be, and that was certainly the case for me. Nothing that I've done on the world stage would have been possible in any other country. But let's look at how we are on the world stage. The book, we interviewed about 50 people to try and get an understanding of what it is that makes us different. But one of the things that also came out of the book was just how bad we are at appreciating who we are as a country, and particularly in educating our young children in terms of who we are as a country. So I'll give you some very simple examples, but who's heard of Peter Beck? Anybody? Peter Beck? Okay. So Rocket Man, right? So you've got a guy called Rocket Man, and he exemplifies that Kiwi no respect for the status quo. He was a young guy, I think he's even under the age of 40, and he's got a business now where he's got a rocket that's a recyclable rocket that can go up and deploy a satellite. He's booked up for the next 5 years. It's a $280 million company with investment from the US. But he started out simply by mixing solid and liquid fuel together, which gives you a 40% better payload than something that NASA had ever thought of doing. And that's what we do in New Zealand. We're very simple and elegant about what we do. So you've got people like Peter Beck. And the reason that he could do that was he went down to the Iraqi Gulf and he's put his first rocket up into the atmosphere. You can't do that in America. If you did that in America, the FBI would be around your place with tracker dogs. There's no private individual who can actually put a rocket up into the stratosphere. If you try and do that in Australia, the air traffic controllers will want to know where it's going to land. We've no bloody idea where it landed. And that's because we're Kiwis. So he found the funding and started a business. Who's heard of Bill Buckley? Bill Buckley? Okay, probably only less than 1%. If you've got one of these, or a flat screen TV, you've been touched by Bill Buckley. Bill Buckley makes 90% of the machines in the whole world that fire up the chips, that send the anything that's got a photovoltaic display, whether it's this thing here or that thing there, it's made using a machine that's made in New Zealand. If you fast forward to, say, 1953, who's heard of Colin Murdoch? Okay, nobody. Every single person in this room has been touched by Colin Murdoch. He was a pharmacist from Timaru, and he had one moment of observation. His wife was dictating the shopping list, and the Bic pen he had, which was one of those terrible Bic pens from the 1950s, was totally transparent. and it stopped working, and he could see a little bit of ink at the end, so he sharpened up some matchsticks, poked them down to get that last little bit of ink out, and continued to write the list. And then he had that one moment of observation, went into the garage, fired up the lathe, and invented the world's first plastic disposable hypodermic syringe, which changed global healthcare. Because before that, we were actually washing out glass syringes. Everybody that got a vaccination was vaccinated with a glass syringe, which you had to clean out with detergent, you had to wash with distilled water, you had to dry it. And that meant you had to build a factory to reprocess those things. And it meant that global vaccination was not possible. So Colin, who was a good friend of mine, was the first person who taught me that one person could change the world. And because at the same time that he was inventing that, I was in an orphanage in the UK, lined up with the whole school in alphabetical order, getting my BCG jab. And this woman in big surgical stockings, she had the biggest 50cc syringe I'd ever seen, and she had the same needle, because we didn't even know about AIDS in those days, and she just went down the whole line. And I was bloody glad my name was Avery. I've got 2 daughters, they're called Amelia and Anastasia, in case we run out of plastic. Always doing failure mode risk analysis. So they're just some of the examples. But what I can tell you is that right now, billions and billions of people around the world are using technology invented by us. Anybody heard of a guy called Ian Wright? Ian Wright? Yeah. Okay. So you know Tesla? Tesla cars, the big international company that's changing the world. Well, he was the guy that really started it. He's called a co-founder, but he was the Kiwi guy that went to Elon Musk and got the money. And it's a Kiwi, so even in other things, if you think about what's happening around the world, every movie that you see that's got any animation in it, has a start in Weta Workshops. If you've got a paintball gun, the trigger mechanism for that was invented by a Kiwi. I love the fact that we won the World Cup, the Rugby Cup, because we shouldn't. On the demographics of the number of people per head of population, the statistics say you can't win the World Cup, you just don't have the talent. But we've got no respect for the status quo, and we did. But it gave me immense pleasure to know that when that final whistle was blown, that whistle was invented by a Kiwi. And that's what we're like. So in this room, we have the opportunity for you guys to start using those observation skills and come up with something that will change things. What I want you to do is actually stretch your imagination, because generally what you do when you try and solve a problem is to be very linear in that process. And that's what happens when those companies are overrun by disruptive technology. So the disruptive technology is something that's happening outside of that whole area that suddenly changes everything. So right now I've invented a company, or I've set up a company called Visual Monitoring, and it'll be announced shortly a partnership with Samsung. So we take Samsung a smartwatch, and we have put in that smartwatch a lot more gadgets that measure all your biometric signals. And we send that up to the cloud, and we do algorithm analysis of your long-term healthcare prognoses. We can take genomes from your grandparents, put that up there. We can make real predictability about your health, and we'll send you texts at the end of the day about how you've done. So that means that healthcare can come out of the hospital into your territory. And that's going to be the way that healthcare works in the future. Insurance companies will want to see that data if you want to get a discount on your insurance premium. So that's going to disrupt the insurance. We're in that period of disruption. Nobody thought that we could have a cab company like Uber that doesn't have any drivers that it pays directly or employs under contract. It doesn't own any cabs. Or that you could have Trivago, that's a company that doesn't own any hotels, but it's one of the largest accommodation providers globally. And so what we've got to think about in terms of emergency prevention is what tools can we do that are disruptive that we can apply to that. And you also got to think about it. When I was in Christchurch, I saw firsthand, I remember talking to these guys at the conference and saying, when you've had a life like mine and you've been in war-torn areas, you're pretty much not frightened of anything. And then what happened was I was about to walk down the main town where all the facades came down. I'd finished my talk and I collected my bag from the concierge, and I was going to walk down there and find somewhere sushi bar to have some lunch. And if I had, I'd have been killed. But fortunately, a corporate cab pulled up and I thought, oh, bugger it, I'll go to the airport and do my emails. And that really saved my life, because about 2.5 minutes into that journey, the earthquake struck and the cab took most of the shocks. My head was banging against one window and his was against the other. And I didn't realise what had happened. I thought we'd been hit from behind because there was no noise. But then the whole city crumbled around us in dust. And we drove off towards the airport, and the civil defence guys had already cordoned off the earthquake area because they were really prepared for that event. And I got the cab out of the cab and said to the cab driver, "You go home, sort out your family off. I'll sort it all out. I've been in desperate countries. I can look after myself." But then the second earthquake came, and I was on the ground, and I could see the road going up and down like that. Walls were falling down. You could see the disruptive force of an earthquake, where it would break every single bit of mortar, and then when it stopped, it would just collapse. But it had its own sort of self-supporting mechanism while it was shunting, but then it would stop and collapse. Children were falling over and screaming. And that's the first time, genuinely, hand on heart, in my life that I've been terrified, because everything was outside of my control. And I looked up to God and I said, "Okay, I'll get it, knock it off." Because it was the most terrifying thing. And if you understand that, but again, what you can do, I think, if you think about how you might use disruptive ideas around this, you could do some of those interviews from people that have experienced that and put it up virally and get people to buy into what you're trying to say. You need to understand what you want to say to those customers, because the reality is we're going to rely on all of those people to sort things out. There's not enough of us to make everything work. And we haven't even, the beginnings of good design are coming out of Christchurch. But I remember being in Christchurch, and I went to the first hotel to see if I could get a room, and I said, "Have you got any rooms?" And he said, "Yep, got lots of rooms. We can't get into any of them because they've all got electronic locks." And the power was out. So nobody thought about that when they were designing those buildings. So there's a bigger story about how you do prevention for disasters. And, you know, we've often thought about disasters in terms of fire and things like that and exits and so on. But it doesn't really work, even looking at some of these things in terms of all of us getting out that small door, you know, is a tricky thing. So we can design better buildings that are safer for us and our society. But think about the customer, because at the end of the day, if you can communicate those things to the customer, they'll believe you and get the message right. But just to sum up in terms of who we are, there are three characteristics that we have as New Zealanders that are different from the rest of the world. The first one is that we're not fond of rules. And if you don't believe that, when I'm doing this thing, I say, "Hands up anybody who's got a deck that they haven't got a permit for." You know, it's about a metre. Because we do. We just put a window where we think we want, you know, we build a bed. That's close enough, it'll be fine. Because we are a very young country and we just pretty much do what we like. The next thing is that we have no respect for the status quo. Because whether it be somebody who, like Peter Jackson, who takes on the world, makes 3 movies back to back, you shouldn't do that. Or whether it's people who invent core technology that goes on to change the world. I learnt to be like that when I came to New Zealand. I wasn't born like that, but I've got no respect for the status quo. We're doing a whole lot of things. One of the things we've got is a nutritional product which we think will impact positively on 500 million children in sub-Saharan Africa by 2030. And we think really, really big. In fact, the way that we are is, you know, couples those two things together. Not being fond of rules and not having any respect for the status quo. I was giving a talk at a TED talk in America, and a big Texan came up to me afterwards and he said, "I loved your talk, boy. Have you got a card?" And I gave him this card, and on the back of our business card, it's got "Change the World." And everybody in our organisation believes that they can change the world. And I gave him the card, and he looks at the card and he goes, "Change the world, boy. That's a goddamn arrogant statement." I said, "Fuck off." Because we're Kiwis. And the last one is that we dare to dream. New Zealanders dare to dream, and they do dream really, really big. They invent things and change things that propel the human race forwards. And you guys are in a position where you can actually be the future of international prevention around disaster relief. So talk to each other, be observant, because we're New Zealanders and we've got no respect for the status quo, and we change things. Thank you very much.
stay there, stay there. That was hugely entertaining, and I think on top of our fantastic singing this morning, I think that's been really uplifting, and I hope for people in the audience, this is a sense that we are actually on that journey that you're describing. We are creating innovative ways to think about the future of emergency management, and that's only possible because of New Zealand's size and scale and the experience that we have collectively been through. We actually have that maturity to kind of understand how bad it can get, but we also have the experience and the maturity that's come from working through those challenges and problems. And certainly what you've heard from Xray this morning is that ability to think outside of the box about how might we do this differently. You know, what would Kiwis expect from us? They would expect us to do the very best that we can, and we need to think outside the box to deliver that. I'd just like to acknowledge that power of observation and how that can really create innovative opportunities for us, and that ability to look at things from a different perspective, walk in someone else's moccasins, is a really unique one. Your can-do, give it a crack approach that you so eloquently describe, I think sums up the agility and flexibility we look for in emergency management. And this has been a great start for the conference. I think we should acknowledge that what you've done is correct a myth out of Men in Black, that Velcro was discovered by the aliens that were coming to visit the US, and actually we've heard about who really did it. So perhaps I can finish with thanking you and acknowledging with a small token, a bag for your whiskey.
Thank you.